my last book had, I think it was 220 image files. And every time that you need to make a change or a decision about that, that can eat up 50 hours of time. Just trying to do those menial tasks that other people are like I have a friend who's an engraver who worked in New York City working for some big name composers, and he did it in like one day.
Today's guest is one of my favorite people and most frequent guests on the podcast. We actually debate that at the beginning, how many times he's been on. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with Danny Ziemann. Danny's up to a lot all the time, and it's so fun to connect with him. In fact, I just chatted with him live at the 2019 International Society of Bassists Convention, but he doesn't sit still for long. He has recently launched a new music education-focused publishing company called Lowdown Publishing, and they are dedicated to curating the best books for music teachers and helping people out there, you out there, get your idea from the idea stage into a polished product. So Danny and I talk about that and all sorts of other topics. I just love what he's up to. And he and his team are in the middle of an Indiegogo campaign. So check out lowdownpublishing.com or go to our show notes, and we have that Indiegogo campaign linked up. It's only running for another week and a half or 2 weeks or something like that. So definitely get involved. I know I'm going to be involved. I just am such a fan of this project, and I want to support small independent projects like that in the bass world. Quick shout out to our sponsors: D'Addario Strings, Steve Swan String Bass, Upton Bass, the Bass Violin Shop, Modacity, Colstein Music, Encoda, that's Nkoda, and A440 Violin Shop. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation about this exciting new project with Danny Ziemann. Well, man, I don't want to eat up all your time. I can't wait to actually hang out in person one of these days. But I usually write round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. Like every time I talk to somebody, I'm not even sure what this is. But it's been many. You may be the most frequent guest, aside from I used to co-host this with a guy named John Grillo. So he's been on 30 or 35 of these podcasts. So like way back in the early days. But other than that, if you're not my number one most frequent guest, you're a close contender.
I think this might be my sixth. I've done three interviews, and then I think I did 2 talks with Jeff. No, this might be my 7th, because then I did one with Adam Booker.
Oh yeah!
Oh my God.
Okay. Oh yeah. We've even. It's only been a couple months, but what a great sign that someone's up to cool things. And I was just thinking about like the just creativity and how it's kind of like a muscle, and how when you just get in the groove of like making new stuff, you just make new stuff. So I just think it's really exciting. Like from Topics and Jazz, we talked about that not too long ago. Talking with Adam Booker, we talked about Jeff's choruses. We talked about just your career, putting together the Lowdown and everything.
Like creativity is a muscle, and you definitely have to kind of stay on top of that, and you have to ride the momentum. And when you have that sort of raw inspiration to do something, I've realized that if I don't get on that, then the idea is just gone. So that's what I'm trying to capitalize on as much as possible.
Well, and so the latest project, our 7th chat, which is amazing. So Lowdown Publishing, and
yes.
And maybe talk about the idea behind this. What are you trying to do? I've looked through the site. You've got this guide, so I'll link up to all that. But just talk about the impetus behind this publishing company and what you got in store.
Yeah. So initially, when I wrote the Lowdown, the first one back, started this in 2013. Right when I was done with that, or done with the drafting at least, I was lucky to have a friend who was willing to kind of help me put it out there. So he helped me get the book edited, and then I figured out how to get the interior design, and I contacted a friend who was a comic book artist and jazz trumpet player to draw the cover. So it was very much like a grassroots sort of DIY project. And I didn't find many resources available for musicians to put together books. I mean, there are a lot of vanity publishers and a lot of services you can get online for fiction and nonfiction, but music is kind of like a specialty thing, and you have to find someone to edit it that's actually a good writer, and a teacher, and a good musician, because otherwise there are so many things that will just get lost. So as I went through more books, or writing more books, ending with topics, and then completing my master's degree research just on studying bass pedagogy, I realized there's definitely room for more contributions for educational literature, and there's a need for services to help other authors produce music books. I've talked to many people who are like, oh, I've got an idea for this book. I mean, I'm sure that anyone that's listening now has probably had an idea for a book, whether it's been a music book or a cookbook or, a how-to guide for something. And I think people are naturally, people naturally think that way, or they look for solutions to things. And I think now with Lowdown Publishing, our goal is to spread more educational literature for music teachers and the independent learners that are maybe curious about a topic but don't necessarily know what resources to get, or maybe don't have access to a teacher. And then those budding future authors that want to create their own resources but don't necessarily have the access to the editors, or don't necessarily have a plan in place to be able to execute their ideas fully.
Yeah, there's an author, kind of a controversial figure, well, quasi-controversial, named Tucker. Oh, I'm blanking on his name. Tucker Carlson, something like that.
I've heard the name. Yeah.
He wrote a book called "They Serve Beer in Hell" or "They Don't Serve Beer in Hell" or something like that. But he launched a company much more general, certainly not about music education, kind of doing what you're trying to do, and it's such a valuable thing because I'll bet a large percentage of people listening have thought, oh, I've got a book idea, or I've got an idea about that, and even if you and I'll bet a lot of people have great ideas, but just the barriers to entry to, and I, having gone through and self-published 2 books, I know like how complicated it is. Even with resources like, I could put it out on Amazon and do Kindle publishing or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you got to format it, you got to edit it, you need a cover, you need graphical design,
exactly.
You need to make sure that it has flow, that the ideas are being conveyed clearly. That's something I know you have done personally particularly well in the Lowdown and your other books, and then you've got a team that you've built. So the idea for this is somebody who they got a book in them. You're going to help them get that out to the world. And if they've got like an education related idea, bass related idea, music education, is that the idea?
Yeah, exactly. So there's 2 arms to this company. One is that we produce our own books, either from the founders or people whose manuscripts we take on. We say, we really like this idea. There's a need for these types of resources. So it's sort of just your traditional publishing route, print books into ebooks. And then the other arm of the company is those full publishing services that are available to, like you said, the future authors that have the idea. And this could be, someone who's got a rough manuscript or maybe worksheets that they put together and they say, hey, maybe this would be a good book. Like I want to write, for example, maybe I want to write a warm-up guide for my school orchestra. And we're particularly struggling with playing in, third position or whatever random skill. And they might have a bunch of worksheets and they want to put together something that they can actually use as a book that they can provide their students. So we would go through the steps of going through everything and then, consulting with the author, editing. The people on this team, which I should mention a little bit about. I have two of my colleagues who I went to the Eastman School with. One gentleman, Eric Piazza, who's finishing his doctorate in music education. He's been teaching public school music for almost 15 years, I believe. Another guy, John Mills, who we did our master's degrees together. Both of those guys publish and write research and are great, forward-thinking music educators. And then another friend, Michael Sherman, who is sort of our tech specialist, but also a great jazz guitarist. So everyone, every step of the way is involved in music across a broad number of specialties. And so everyone that gets to look at a book has ideas about curriculum and the content design and the actual flow and editing. We can all read the ideas. We can practice them. We can outsource it to other people. And even down to our graphic designers, they're all musicians. Everybody that's involved is a musician. So the sort of advantage to what we do is that we make sure that every step of the way you're getting someone who understands the content deeply is getting to work with it. And so that makes the consulting more special. It's not just a assembly line process for creating books, but really there's a more personal connection, and we can really be really we can take our time. We can really make sure that what we're putting out there is something that, everyone who's involved is proud of and really stands behind.
This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And I've always been impressed by how Steve manages to get basses sounding so vibrant, whether it's a student level bass or a top of the line professional bass. Here's Steve on some of what he has learned in terms of setup.
When steel strings came into general use around 1959, the German bass makers flipped out, and they really got scared that they're going to get big shiploads of basses back that got wrecked by these high-tension steel strings. And so they did three things that really changed the function of the instrument. They shortened the string length, and they lowered the neck angle so the bridges weren't that tall anymore. And then they made the tops a lot thicker. They really wanted to ensure that these basses were not going to come back across the ocean for work anymore. And so the basses tend to sound kind of nasal, and they didn't have any depth. They didn't have a chest voice at all, And so what we do with increasing the neck angle, and we can also increase the overstands for modern playing, can get up into thumb position a lot easier. So a neck reset can accomplish that. Sometimes we'll transplant a neck or make a new neck for these basses that might have a string length that are not friendly to modern playing.
Learn more about what Steve can do to get your bass playing better, and check out his great selection of basses at steveswanstringbass.com. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. This episode is brought to you by Encoda. By the way, that's spelled Nkoda. This app is like Netflix or Spotify for sheet music, and they are working with over 100 of the major publishers like Boozy & Hawkes, Baronwriter, and more to provide sheet music on your device. I have an iPad Pro, but this also works on Android, and I have so many pieces from Encoda loaded up on it. I have all the Beethoven symphonies and their scores. I'm circling things. I'm flipping between the score and the part to show students. I totally love this app, and people like Sir Simon Rattle are singing its praises. It really is the next thing for musicians. It's a subscription service, and you can download Encoda from your app store today for a free trial. That's Nkoda. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast. As I think over the years how many times I've used Colstein products, it's just amazing. I look at my bass right now, which has on the same bib that I bought while in high school. That's a Colstein's bib. I can't believe that this thing is still kicking, but I have my pencils and my rosin and all those other accessories in my bib. And when I look inside my bib, I see my Colstein rosin, which Peter Lloyd and so many other bass players use. I enjoy their Ultra rosin. And I have my Colstein instrument cleaner that I've used for years and years to keep my bass looking good and clean. They've got Varicor strings, which Michael Klinghoffer loves to use, especially on student basses. They've got quivers, stands, so much more. Learn more about their accessories, their beautiful pedigree instruments, and so much more at Colstein.com. The potential is huge for something like this because there are publishers, and they're great publishers like Hal Leonard or Alfred Music, or you name them. But if you've got some material and you've got something kind of in a genesis sort of stage, or even if you've got something completed, it's just incredibly hard to get something in those channels. And even if that happens, which probably like 1% of things submitted get published, probably less than that, it's a multi-year process. So then you can, like we talked about earlier, put it out yourself independently, but then it's on your personal website or it's on Amazon with everything else that you kind of sift through. So the power of building over time an archive, a library with like-minded people, all participating, all in music. I just think it's a beautiful thing. I love it. It's a great idea, and I can't wait to see it develop. Yeah.
Well, and man, from producing podcasts and just everything. Like anytime that you try to do something entirely on your own, it's like once you go through a complete cycle, whether it's producing a show or putting out the book. when I move forward and try it again, I'm always thinking about, okay, like what's not a necessary use of my mental equity, right? Like I could go through and do all of the examples in Sibelius, but my last book had, I think it was 220 image files. And every time that you need to make a change or a decision about that could eat up 50 hours of time. Just trying to do those menial tasks that other people are like I have a friend who's an engraver who worked in New York City working for some big name composers, and he did it in like one day. And it was just amazing that it's like, oh yeah, I don't have to do this, and I can really just focus on producing the content, which is really the only thing that I want to be in charge of. That's the creative part. And then all these other things that eat up a lot of time, it's like not really necessary. There are other people who are experts at that. I don't want to have to figure out how to do it all 100% on my own.
Well, and this is why a lot of people's projects that they have ideas for, they maybe get started, they just linger, on the shelf and never get out there because, I got to go through and everything's all weird for some reason. I've got to go readjust everything, and now my Sibelius is outdated or finale, or I lost the files or whatever. And so just to have other, and my experience just putting out a couple of print books with very little graphics or anything, even that took forever and so many typos, and I had various people read it and edit it, and then I still caught typos, and then I don't like the way that flows, or I had an error, arithmetic error for something, and so it just, you need help to put out anything that you want to be proud of. I do for this podcast, and this is this certainly much more ephemeral than a book that you're gonna be sending out to the public. So it's beautiful. I can't wait to see it develop, and I want to make sure to mention you're starting an Indiegogo campaign, or it's going at this point by the time people are listening. Talk about that.
So we are raising funds to help with the production costs of our first 5 books. And these books are written by really excellent music educators and performing musicians. So we have a book written by Bob Snyder, who's a jazz guitar professor at the Eastman School of Music and works at the Eastman Community School. It's a guide to putting together chord melodies on guitar and playing them in a trio situation. And then we have a book by Doug Stone, who teaches, he's a jazz professor at Louisiana State University. It's a warm-up guide for really any instrument that just wants a better jazz warm-up, something that they can do a little bit each day. I'm writing my next volume in the Topics in Jazz Bass series, which is going to be a book on soloing, which admittedly was something I said I would never really do. And now after I've gone through the literature, I've seen there's some space for it, and I've had some people actually ask me for lessons on soloing, so now's the time. Then there's a book on advice. It's practical advice for reflective music teachers, and it's written by the co-founder, myself and the rest of the co-founders. And that's just a book for beginning music teachers or sort of early career music teachers, and advice on some of the things they might have to deal with that they may not have known about, or assumptions about what teaching is like. And then the last book is a book by Carmen Intore, who's a jazz drummer, and he plays with Pat Martino, tours all throughout the world, and lives outside of New York. So basically just funding the production of those books. We're giving people the opportunity to pre-purchase them. So there's different packages, and all of them are at a discount when you pre-purchase them. And then we also have some extra perks, including personal dedications in the books. And in the topics book, I'm going to be writing etudes for people who choose to donate. There's a special perk for that, and then we'll make some videos and put them online. So again, for the people who want the books, but also people who are maybe interested in something more personal, we have everything. Every kind of perk you could want is up there.
Well, I think it's beautiful to be able to support people's creative projects like that. I'm such a fan of just that, this sort of newer model that we have with crowdfunding campaigns, and being able to get something personalized, like an etude. How cool is that? Or get a mention in the book. And just, I can't wait to check out these books. These are all, you could be a guest every week and we'd have something to talk about, because I now have all these follow-up questions. I know we probably don't have time for, certainly not all of them, but okay, the reflections in music teaching. teaching. That's something that I certainly could have used when I was heading out into the public school teaching world. I felt and I had already been teaching private bass, but I felt like I had no idea what I was doing, like in any way. And I don't remember exactly what the burnout rate is in terms of teachers, public school teachers, or any type of teacher, but it's very high. I think the number of people that last more than 5 years I think it's well under 50%. Make it beyond that.
I think so too.
And that's collectively written by all of you. That book?
Yeah. So we wanted something that, like you said, that we would want if we were in the beginning of our teaching careers, and so it sort of mixes the best of our experiences, which is classroom general music, classroom instrumental music, private teaching studios. And it talks just about some of the things that you might have to face that you're unaware of. Like, let's say you get a new teaching job and the last person that was in the gig had it for 30 years and just retired, and everyone around you is telling you how great the program is and how amazing the teacher was, and what types of assumptions and expectations you might have about the teaching position that are true and that are not true, and how to deal with some of the emotional commitment to teaching, and how, just how to have a healthier perspective on it, and how to deal with what types of emotions are okay, what types of emotions are normal, because there's a lot of questions. When I first started teaching, I was like, oh, is this right? Like, should I be doing this? Am I helping the students? So again, it's just a way to help increase reflective thinking and counteract maybe some of the teacher attrition rates that we were just discussing.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Apply graphite, like pencil lead, to the bridge and nut, the contact points of the string, to ensure the strings slide smoothly on their way up to tension. This prevents them from getting stuck and unwinding or pulling the bridge so that it leans. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. Did you know that they regularly ship basses nationally from coast to coast? Contact their team to find out more information about the shipping process and how you can get your dream bass delivered to your doorstep. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. Buying an instrument or bow is a major decision, especially the first time a student's looking for an instrument. Here's A440 Violin Shop's Michael Spadero on what he advises.
We usually start with an approximate price range, and we'll show them anything within that price range. And then to give them a little bit of context, I'll often show them instruments that are more or less expensive than that. But I say to play as many instruments or bows as possible before you buy.
Whether you're looking for a new instrument or a new bow or that next step in your journey, A440 Violin Shop has got you covered. Look for them online at a440violinshop.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Well, it's something that I've heard various educators talk about, and I think it could apply to like a bass section or other things, but there are like 4 quadrants of people you could be following. So you get into a new position that could be good and well-liked, and there's a set of skills to follow someone who is good and well-liked. In some ways, that's the easiest to step into because you can just sort of keep the ship going. Then there's good and not well-liked, which is a unique challenge. Then there's not good and not well-liked, which is its own set of challenge. And then the toughest one to follow is not good but liked, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So
it's like pizza parties every day.
Yeah, right. So they all are very, very different in their challenges. Well, I can't wait to check out that. And then a soloing book. Wow. Okay, so that's cool. Have you started to sketch that out yet, or can you give us a sneak preview of what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've sketched out. So there's a plan for 6 chapters right now, and the more I get into teaching, the more I'm getting away from the idea of presenting linear teaching models. So the idea behind this book is it's going to be 6 different subjects or things that you can practice that will improve your improvisation. But it's not necessarily a straight line. Like you don't go through from chapter 1 through chapter 6. So I'm planning on there being a section talking about guide tones, just how guide tones sort of form the foundation of moving through chord changes. But that's going to be orally based. So there's going to be some ear training there. And then a section on transcribing, and I'm going to provide some examples that people can transcribe at home, ways of using vocabulary, like how to develop ideas using little melodic fragments, and so on. So it's just like things that contribute to your ability to improvise. But I'm going to put a big disclaimer in there and say that this book it doesn't teach you everything, but it exposes you to healthy practices that improvising musicians do and embody in their playing. And I'm also, honestly, I'm going to point to other resources that I use as well to also help, because I think there are a lot of great resources. I mean, I think of John Goldsby's book off the top of my head. And I think that, there's no one resource that does it all. So this book will be sort of a stepping stone to, help beginner improvisers and even people who have experience to get more comfortable with some of those ideas.
I love nonlinear models like that. It's great to be able to jump in like that. And, the idea of teaching all there is to know about improvisation in a linear model is kind of ridiculous. It's like you get through this and then go, young grasshopper, improvise. It's so I can't wait to check that out. And then you've also, as if you don't have enough that you've been working on with this project and other projects, you got this very cool guide that you put out, 8 steps to self-publishing your music book. Tell us a little bit about what's inside this guide.
So it's just 8 steps that I've come up with that will help you go from, and I like saying, oh, I've got this great idea, to actually getting it down on paper, being able to present it to somebody else. And little tricks that I found were helpful along the way, like making sure to do your research and really checking out the topic you want to write about, and when it's okay to share with other people, and when you should start sharing it with editors, basically dividing your responsibilities so you can focus on content creation and have a plan to actually be able to say, oh, I've done this. Now I'm ready to send it to an editor, and now I'm ready for this step. Basically, like you were saying, the guide that I wish I had when I started writing books in the beginning, and what I found worked for me.
And it's so great to have a guide and a checklist and something like this that you can go through, because I know my process is I find it incredibly messy. It's like research and this and this and draft 17 and this, and I never feel like anything's ready to move to the next step. So I'm keeping this guide in my Evernote, and the next time I dig into something, a larger project like that, I'm going to be going through that.
Cool. Well, thank you. And I also want to add too that, regardless of whether people, if they have ideas and they decide they don't want to go through lowdown publishing, like that's totally fine. I just want there to be something out there that people can use to help their process become easier. Because like I said, I haven't found anything that is really clear for musicians. I mean, if someone's listening to the show and they have a resource that they found, like I would love to see it. Because I think anything that's out there that helps to expand the community is good. And we need that. We need more support around people putting their ideas out there. So hopefully someone will get inspired by this. Whether or not it brings them to us, just totally fine. I just want to inspire somebody to move forward confidently with producing a book.
Well, from the very first time I remember checking out the Lowdown Volume 1, the first thought that came to mind is just how clear the laying out of ideas was. And then I saw you present about 3 years ago on the topic, and also just the clarity of thought and the clarity. And so to have you and these other collaborators be able to assist in projects like that, it's just going to raise the bar for music educators everywhere. So thank you. I love this. Can't wait to chat with you again for round 8.
Thank you, man.
And I'll link up to your site and your courses and all the stuff you got going on. So
beautiful, man. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Danny. So great to have you on again for, I think, the 7th time. And check out lowdownpublishing.com. Check out the Indiegogo campaign. We've got that linked up in the show notes, and it's on their website as well. And I can't wait to see what he's up to next. If you'd like to hear from us outside of these podcasts, we have a weekly email newsletter we've been doing for a few years now. Got a great audience built up there of many thousands of people, and we talk about much more than just the podcast. We talk about bass news in general, cool links and resources and PDFs and happenings and that kind of thing. Check out our website, contrabassconversations.com, for more info on that. And while you're there, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, you can do so right there, contrabassconversations.com/subscribe. No matter how you listen to podcasts, we've got you covered there. And we also have an app. If you aren't listening to podcasts, you probably know what an app is. contrabassconversations.com/app will give you more information. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And Mitch is making beautiful basses in the Dallas area. He's got a new location in downtown Kilgore, Texas. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging and archiving everything we talk about here on the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.